The VShojo meltdown continues as things get worse for the VTubing company. Of course, the legal mindset we teach you to be your own judge. I'm Andrew Esquire, American attorney, and this is a fast facts version. Now, this is going to be a not so fast facts version because I was having some internet troubles. I don't know really what it was. I thought it was my streaming software. I thought it was OBS, but it's probably a connection issue for tonight. So while I get that sorted, I'm going to do this one. It will be a little longer than normal because I've got a lot of stuff I need to cover. Some things I have covered, some things I haven't covered, and we're going to get to those today on this kind of extended fast facts version. Please leave a comment and a like below, and I do apologize for those attending the lives and weren't able to see that because, well, my connection wasn't working. So sorry, guys. I love you and appreciate you. But as always, we have a PowerPoint. So let's get through this PowerPoint on the death of VShojo. So starting out with, of course, the best meme out of this with Case on here. We've got Justin the Gun Run Ignacio. Now, he made an official statement, which I did a separate video on, but I had some additional stuff now that I've simmered down a bit and thought about it. Another thing I wanted to mention about this statement, and as before, I said this is a confession. This is admitting to criminal activity. This in no way removes him from culpability. His attempt to say this was something that he, quote unquote, later learned does not get him out of it. And also all the proof shows he knew about this. And he was actively fundraising for Iron Mouse during this. We have photos of that. We have proof of that. And he even sent out a congratulations. So him trying to ostrich this is absolutely ridiculous. And he is, of course, as the CEO, responsible for everything in the company, right? At the ultimate, the buck stops at the top, right? That's why you get paid the big paycheck, because you have the big risk, right? So at the top of the food chain, you have the highest risk and the highest reward. If your company is super successful, you can become a Bezos or Elon Musk, etc., right? But if it fails, you can be an Enron, right? And you can be that guy. So that's the risk of CEOs. That's why you take on that burden, and that can ruin you as a personal brand, as an individual CEO, if you are at the head of a company. And now this guy, the Gun Run, is going to be bearing that for the rest of his life. Now, does that mean the responsibility stops with him? Listen up, Tech Town. No, it does not. Of course it doesn't. But he still is responsible as well. So Gun Run is on the line, and others are too. And what was really funny is, like rats off the ship, we have this guy over here, Mutindo, who immediately, this is a guy who quit, 2 months ago-ish, and he's trying to say, nah, bro, what the absolute F at the Gun Run, pretending as if he didn't know. This thing was going on for a year almost, and likely even longer, but at least a year, right? We've got proof that it may be much longer than a year, but certainly when he was there. So yes, he knew about this. This was not a secret. In fact, we're going to show this recently revealed pitch deck that actually shows that this guy would 100% have been there at the time in which this was going down. So trying to pretend that he didn't know this absolutely does not. And further, it wouldn't get him off from being deposed, from being, investigated for his portion, his contribution to this, because certainly this guy, knew something. So, I mean, he's got to, they've got to figure out, okay, what did this guy know? What did he not know? What part of this would he be culpable for or not culpable for? Because there's something that this guy likely did know. And, they were looking at these projections, which, here's part of the pitch deck here in my PowerPoint, and then we'll go over a summary that's been provided on X. You've got a forecast from October 2024, which already wasn't looking good. Right. The forecast was already looking not good, even in October of 2024. But then you see in January, and this is based on Addison, who got this information over here on X. And I am taking this at its face value. So understanding that, of course, any information can be proven to be not credible, etc. But let's take this at face value because it matches up with concurrent testimony and concurrent reports and pretty much the consistent reports of the talent. So at this point, I am going to take this at face value. So based on what Addison says here, Wifey and I got access to a recent VShojo pitch deck, and some of the stuff is really interesting. TLDR describes Gunrun as the most well-connected Twitch staff. That is very interesting. Lost $2.5 million in 2024. What that shows to me is a level of financial negligence that is pretty insane. And I understand that businesses are supposed to lose money the first couple years, but this business has been going since 2020, right? At this point, at some point, you have to start making calls to cut back. And I'm sorry, as an adult, and once again, as a CEO, and this guy is not a child, he's not a kid, he's an adult, you need to make adult business decisions. What does that mean? Scaling back on advertising and marketing. What does that mean? Scaling back on some large events. What does that mean? Cutting back staff. If you have staff that need to be trimmed, they've got to be trimmed. What does that mean? Renegotiating splits if you have to, and then maybe you'd have to lose contracts over that, right? Or changing terms, etc. And understanding that you led people in with an unsustainable model. And I understand that they wanted to have this model that was, oh, the talents first, and oh, we're going to do all this for them. But that wasn't the reality of how a business could operate. And they certainly were not able to operate that way for whatever reason. And we don't know exactly how their finances split out. We don't know where that money was funneling, who was getting what. I'm really, really, really curious to get those balance sheets and show exactly where they were allocating their money. And based on some reports, and I know that CDOG VA did this, it seems like they might have been over budgeting on advertising and marketing, like in Shinjuku Station, when they should have been focusing on, paying for the talents and, paying the talents at all. So there's probably some misallocation of funds. We don't know yet whether there was any true theft of funds. So we do not know yet whether they were taking the funds for a completely wildly illegitimate purpose outside the business, for example, for personal gain, for buying a yacht, for buying a Ferrari, a Lamborghini. We also don't know what the compensation was for the executives. Were they taking a haircut? Were the executive officers taking a haircut at a time in which they were not paying out their contracts? That's what I want to know. And I have a sneaking suspicion that they were not. But we'll see. So even with aggressive growth, they'd still not turn a profit, even with aggressive growth. And that's unrealistic, right? This includes plans to license out IP. What IP? See, that's the thing. They don't own the IP. So the only way they could do that is if they renegotiated the contracts to take the IP away from the talents, to remove the IP from the talents. The only way to license out IP under those contracts would be to get the permission of the talents to license out that IP. Now, a license can be terminated at any time, right? A license is not a sale, but still, that's a lot. And that is a very interesting element there with regarding the IP that they were planning to perhaps restrict or renegotiate the contracts as it relates to IP. So uses the fact they raised $1 million for charity to attract investment. Unable to confirm if it's the 500K. It probably is. 10 managers, 10 talent managers, their salaries are included within the cost of goods sold. Once again, there's been a lot of accountants, and shout out to all the accountants that are out there that have said this is ridiculous. Why? And I'm not an accountant, but I've read a lot of budgets, particularly corporate and government budgets. Why would you do that? That doesn't make sense to me, right? 20 to 30 employees, claims IP posts. Now, once again, I don't know whether that's way too much, but they probably had some folks that they could look into saying, hey, look, we're not doing well. We need to work on our budget. And frankly, when times are tough, you do have to cut back, and you do have to say, hey, some staff has got to go, right? Who do we have here that we can remove without hurting the talents? And from what I've heard with the from the talents in general, is that the support just wasn't really there. They weren't getting that support. So what are the talent managers and employees doing? They were not fully supporting the talent as far as the reports I've heard go. Now, I could hear elsewise, but we'll see. Claims IP licensing will bring in $2.1 million with nothing to back up that number. That's completely speculative. The reason why they use that number is because they're trying to plug a hole here. They're trying to say, well, this is our magic bullet that's going to save us. Initially contained IRL photos of VShojo talent, which we redacted. they were straight up doxing the talent from this. That's really to me, that part of this story is absolutely nuts. And this is the part where, I just think the story keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And the picture that it's painting is of a corporation that just fully was neglecting their clients for a delusion, for essentially a delusion. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I'll pull up some of the slides here. Let's pull up some of the slides just so we get through that, because I just want to show you guys that some of the stuff here. Okay, so obviously you've got hold on, we got here. You've got some financial projections here, which we showed already. We've got VShojo. Once again, this is January. So that executive that left 2 months ago is not going to get out of what was public knowledge in 2025 that they're losing money, right? So you have the financial projections there, right? And I believe here we go. I had this post here. There were doxes of talents here. Doxing Nova. Crazy stuff. Right? Talking about, all the stuff they're going to do, which once again, don't really know it's going to happen. And their projections, not looking good at all. So really crazy stuff coming out of that. And thank you for Addison for getting that information and for putting that together, because I think that's a big element in this story. Okay. So the next thing we have is the Vebe kind of letting go of all of our information. Now, this is a big one to go through, and I may even do, we'll have to maybe even do a separate comment on this, because maybe people will have questions or bring this up. But this is great because Vebe now essentially took the position that the NDAs are void. Now, to be very clear, and I made this comment on another video, each talent needs to talk with their lawyers if they are confident, if their lawyer is confident with them going out and speaking out. I can't tell them. However, my general opinion is at this point, the gun run said they're insolvent. So the gun run said they have no money. So with what money are they going to pay a bunch of lawyers to go chase down and enforce NDAs? I think it's highly unlikely. However, that risk is not for me to take for the talent. The talent is the one to choose, hey, am I going to risk that gun run is going to use his personal money to go sue everybody? Because he might. We don't know. We don't know what's going to go on with that. Some people are very litigious. And as we're going to see from Vebe's story here, which does check out, is that VShojo was very litigious, and they were absolutely using threats of lawsuits to intimidate people, lawsuits that perhaps they couldn't even bring, and they would definitely lose if it came to a fight, but they were threatening to drain the talents because they know that they've got more money than the talents. So in a general legal battle, yes, they might lose on the law, but in the money, in the procedure, in the, hey, we can draw this out and make this annoying for you, they might be able to win, or at least scare them and intimidate them. So let's get into this with the Vebe story here. So saying why I left. Back in 2023, VShojo tried to bully me into one of the most predatory contracts I'd ever seen. Now, I will say this. The version of the VShojo contract that I saw is not as predatory as Niji Sanji, but it wasn't good, right? And now a lot of people have asked me to release that. I will not, because the person asked me to not do that. And I do respect confidentiality, particularly as an attorney. So that will not be happening. However, it was not great. We'll put it that way. So when I tried to ask more about it, their CEO got extremely hostile with me and refused to answer any questions. So I had to hire a lawyer in order to get some clarification. So that's very normal. You are fully allowed to hire a lawyer of your own. There's nothing wrong with that. During the talks, it became clear that VShojo would rather let me go than take less from me, which is very true. They usually will try to treat you like dirt, so they make you sign the contract they want and they don't negotiate it. They were ultimately wanting me to give up more than half of all my sponsor revenue and over 60% of the merch sales. All I asked for them in return is not to take a cut of the sponsors I was getting through Mythic, as that cut was already taken. They said no. They wanted it all. And so I asked to leave after being treated like I was disposable in their talks. They basically made it seem like they were my employer. This is the big point, guys. They are acting like employers. This is why I think labor law needs to apply to them as employers because of their behavior, because of their control, because their structure, because their predatory nature. I think that the regulatory bodies need to look at this and say, this is not the way you behave with an independent contractor. You behave this way, employee and employer. And this is spot on from Vebe. And they're the reason for my success. And I owe them, and I should be happy to give them my money. In order for me to leave, they demanded I sign an NDA that prevented me from speaking to any other talent about it. Here's the thing. If you're an independent contractor, particularly, they can't prevent you from leaving. And if, under US law, you can just say bye. There should be no way they can prevent you from leaving. What they probably did, and this is probably something that was added on here, was say, we're not going to pay you unless you sign an NDA, or we're not going to pay out your last payments, et cetera, or whatever we owe you unless you sign an NDA. Maybe they did that. But by the way, what is that in terms of additional consideration? Whenever you have an additional contract or something else, there should be something else given, exchanged in response. What are they giving you for that? If they wanted you to sign an NDA, they should have already made you sign it in the beginning. Right? They're making you sign an additional NDA. No, sorry, you're not going to sign that. You don't have to sign that. You're not obligated to sign that. Now they can threaten you all they want, but if they're going to go to court, okay, they're going to try to sue you and say, oh, they didn't sign an extra NDA, and the judge is going to say they didn't have to. There's no obligation for them to sign an additional NDA. They can just say, screw you, VShojo, and walk. And for talents out there that are in corporations that are trying to make them do this, what you need to ask them is, what are you going to give me for it? And if it's, well, we're going to pay you what we owe you, that's not good enough. You already owe that money. You already legally owe that money. If they're saying, oh, we're going to withhold your last paycheck, no, you need to pay me that money. That's money you owe me. That's not something extra. That's something special. Give me something extra. If you want me to sign an NDA, you better grease the wheels. And maybe they'll pay you some money, or give you some cut or a bonus or something else for signing an NDA. And if that's something you're happy with, then okay. If you're not, don't sign the NDA. But this is extraordinarily predatory, extraordinarily predatory. I cannot say why I was leaving. I cannot say what the terms that I was saying no to were. I even got in trouble for advising them to hire their own attorneys, because you know what? They didn't even have a real attorney. They had an unlicensed attorney. Yes, that's right. This is something that's come out with Silvervale and other places. They had an unlicensed attorney. An attorney that their bar had license had expired. Now, some corporations do this. In fact, I worked at a large corporation, I had 30 lawyers, and 2 of them did have expired licenses. Now, the thing is, a lot of the work that those lawyers with expired licenses were doing was not what I would call formal practice of law. They were doing a lot of like document review and some sort of like document filing, et cetera, stuff like that. They're more like paralegals that were attorneys. And of course, paralegals are not lawyers, right? But they still do work that contributes to the legal field, right? They still work at law firms. So they were doing more paralegal type work, which generally is fine. Or if you're doing more business type work, that's fine. So a lot of lawyers that are no longer actively practicing, that don't keep their bar lessons up, they're still in business. I mean, lawyers can do other things. Lawyers can, do whatever they want to do. They're free people. So that is not surprising totally, but it's dangerous. The other big thing is with attorneys that have expired licenses that are no longer licensed to practice, they no longer have attorney-client privilege. So anything you say to them as a corporation, right? So let's say you're talking to your quote unquote attorney, but they're not a real attorney. They don't have a license. Well, then there's no attorney-client privilege. And that's one reason why, or at least personally, I try to keep my license up, because attorney-client privilege is one of the most awesome things ever to be able to engage, because it's practically impossible to break. It's essentially impossible to break attorney-client privilege once that's engaged. So that's a pretty awesome part about being a lawyer, and you lose that within the corporation if you have an unlicensed lawyer. So that's a little fun fact there. They would watch my streams, read my Discord, and threaten to sue me. And if I said anything that hinted towards how I felt about the company, I was threatened with a lawsuit. This is really predatory, extremely predatory. Another one of the leave terms was that they announced both me and Silver on the same day in order to minimize the damage to their company. The CEO began to push the narrative on 4chan, and yes, I'm serious. Another social media that I'm leaving because I plan to join OTK, and that both me and Silvervale are troublemakers, so they were letting us go. Later, I found that Nyaners wanted to leave around the same time due to also being unhappy with the contract, but was told that she couldn't because it would not fit the narrative they were pushing internally and externally. The amount of hate we've gotten over leaving, from fans calling us greedy biatches to people saying we're abandoning our friends and tossing aside the company because we're successful enough, shit was effing painful. Not being able to say anything sucked. I only found out I didn't get paid for any of my sponsors after I'd signed the NDA. After 2 years, I'd still not got paid. So literally, look, I mean, to be honest, that was probably why she signed the NDA in the first place, to be paid, and then she didn't even get paid. So she should have been like, hey, I'm going to speak up and break this NDA because you broke your payment terms. See, this is when you got to get an attorney involved, because this should not have gone 2 years. And this should have been remedied before 2 years. This is not okay. And this is the problem with VTubing, is that these companies prey upon people that have limited resources and also limited knowledge of the legal system. And this is a huge abuse here. So if you are not being paid, and it has been 6 months or 3 months or 9 months or a year or 2 years, you need to speak to an attorney, please, a local attorney that specializes in labor law in the place where you are. To add insult to injury, they also demanded I pay them back $10K for some anniversary assets where they'd sent me months later, which were half finished. Despite all of that, I've had immense faith that the company had gotten better over the past 2 years. I've assumed they rewrote their contracts after losing 3 people due to them seeing all the new talent join. This was clearly not the case. Nope. Now, some fun facts. Their company lawyer had an expired law license. He literally does not practice law. Yet he was the point of contact for any legal help we needed. This is dangerous. This is dangerous because, once again, there's no attorney-client privilege. Speaking to this lawyer, it's not a law. I mean, it's not an attorney, right? They do not have a bar license, so that's a big deal. They actively pitted us against each other during our time there, and compared to the success of others, they tried to enforce streaming schedules so that our view count will look better due to less overlap. They would always talk smack about other VTuber agencies. They literally would spend company money to get a tiny dig at them, especially HoloLive. And if this is where we find out they spent their money to they literally spent company funds to dig on HoloLive, this will be insane. It was literally lived rent-free in Gunrun's head. They were convinced HoloLive was over when they signed Kson and Nazuna. Once again, you know, HoloLive and Niji Sanji Anycolor are not going over or not going under for one bump in the road. Yes, they'll have some hiccups. Yes, they'll have some stops, but they're big enough and they're public companies, so they're capitalized at a much higher level than Gunrun, right? And VShojo. Our previous talent manager got ghosted for 6 months by Gunrun, told not to do any work for us, and then got fired for not doing anything. During this fiasco, we weren't able to get any advice. That's crazy. This guy does seem very unstable. MTD got reprimanded for being creepy to us. Got told not to message us privately. I mean, this one I want to know more details on, because this sounds like workplace, perhaps sexual harassment or gender discrimination. What was going on there? I mean, because that might be a criminal claim or a labor claim of its own, depending on what happened. We don't know. I mean, that's hinting like creepy. What does that mean? So that one is a question mark. I have proof from other streamers attending IRL parties that MTD would actively smack talk me after I left the company to paint me in the worst light imaginable. Don't know why you're acting innocent on Twitter, pretending you weren't aware of anything. That's a lie. Obviously, this guy knew, and he's lying through his teeth. According to the pitch deck in January, he knew. Can't wait to see that's come out about you, because there's loads that aren't my stories to tell. And that is what I want to hear. So this is very interesting. This is the first person to break the NDA. But as I said, and I said this before, you guys remember, I said, just you wait. It'll all come out. Be patient. And it is now coming out. It is now 100% coming out. Some other stuff that we're going to go over here on the PowerPoint, right? And this is other updated stuff. Henya did a stream, and in addition to saying that she was not paid like many of the other talents, she mentioned merch and undelivered merch. Now, some of you have asked Is merch an asset? Well, yes, technically. But the problem is it's an asset that's already encumbered, meaning that those assets that they have in merch already need to be shipped out to customers that paid for them. So the customers that paid for them either need to get that merch or they need to get a refund for that merch. But let's say you take that merch and you sell it separately. You just sell it, the bankruptcy trustee takes the merch in a big bag of all the plushies and the hats and everything else, t-shirts, etc., Daki Makara, takes them all and sells them at a garage sale, and essentially liquidates them. He's not going to get full value, and he's not probably going to be able to pay people back full price on that. You might be able to just give them what they have if it's there, but we'll see. Even though, yes, merch is an asset, it's already allocated. It's already something that's been purchased in many of these cases because it's unshipped. This is a whole separate nightmare to deal with, a massive nightmare to deal with. And this is something that was exposed on the Henya stream. We also have Nyaners saying that she was also not paid. That's great. That's great. So not paid for multiple years going back to 2023. So we're seeing this as something that is a trend for this company for several years, which is a problem, and also shows that the gun run and the management team should have shut this thing down or trimmed it down or done some radical changes to this company years ago. This is not something that got out of hand in a couple of months. This is something he let dig into the dirt. He took $11 million and spilled that into 2.1 million or 2.5 million in debt, right? In the hole. And we don't even know whether that's the full extent of how deeply they're in the hole right now. That's just some of the guesses on how deep this company is in the hole, but they're certainly not doing good. This is also vague. Saying looks like nothing changed between 2023 and 2025 in terms of how the org management moves. Couldn't and still can't say because of the NDA. Well, she fixed that and we got that read out. So obviously, what the point I wanted to get for this is that this was going on in 2023, right? So it's going on for years. Silvervale, and this is a huge one, says that her heart goes out. There's a lot I wish I could say, but I signed a pretty aggressive NDA. They made my mom sign one too. Completely unenforceable. The mom has nothing to do with this. The mom has no way, is in no way related, was likely not compensated, although I don't know for sure, right? I guess if they separately compensated her mom in some way, maybe. I highly doubt it. And I truly hope Silvervale speaks with an attorney, and she just talks to an attorney, has a conversation, and says, I want to break this NDA. This company is defunct, right? What do you think, attorney? And I hope they give her the nod and she can speak up like Vebe, because this is a situation in which I want to hear how they made her mom sign that NDA and under what circumstances they did that. I want to hear that story specifically, because that has got to be one of the worst situations I've heard out there. And to me, the other thing that generally is so heartbreaking is that most VTubers tend to be on the young side. They tend to be younger people, right? So 20s, for example. And they haven't had a lot of experience in the business world. They haven't a lot of experience in the corporate world. And so they don't know what's normal and what's not normal. And they don't know that this is completely abnormal behavior. They're often so awestruck and starstruck by being part of a corporation and so excited to be part of a team that just sign off on anything. They just sign on the dotted line and do whatever it takes to get inside the corporation. You really got to take a beat, take a breath, and think about the soul that you're selling. Next, we had these slide decks as well here that got leaked out. So this is one that, once again, separately confirmed they're in the hole for 2 million as of 6/21. And the last thing I want to talk about is piercing the corporate veil. So this is going after the personal assets of the managers, of the executive team, including the gun run, but also maybe MTD, other people, right, that were there before, to the extent they're culpable. So to the extent they are responsible for the wrongdoing, then, and only then, they can be on the line. So here's where the standard is for piercing the veil. So executives can be held personally liable for corporate liabilities if there's absence or inaccuracy of records, concealment, fraud, or financial misrepresentations, commingling of assets, siphoning of funds and assets, manipulation of assets and liabilities. And the last one, which I think is the most damning, is significant undercapitalization, which means not funding the company enough. And I think in this case, we have a very, very, very good chance to pierce the corporate veil, because many of these things do show up, do pop up. And if we get the appropriate evidence which links this, I think there's a chance, right? Once again, no certainty. There's never a certainty in the law, but there's a strong chance. The criminal investigation, I think, in my eyes, looking at this, has to happen into this company, particularly related to charity, particularly related to the allocation of funds, particularly related to the relationship with the wages. I think there needs to be an investigation of this absolutely as quickly as possible, and we will see what happens going forward. Of course, I will cover it on the legal mindset, and I will also catch you on the.
Are you guys enjoying the stream today?